Don't judge a book by its cover, and looks can be deceiving are two sayings that come to mind when it comes to unidentified falling objects. I took a look at it and saw what looked like a cool and colorful puzzle game. My first impression of it even led me to believe that it leaned more towards being a casual game, so as a result of that, I assumed that I'd be able to beat UFO quickly and be able to get a full review out within a short amount of time. Unfortunately, I was wrong. That's one of the reasons why this is a first impressions video rather than a full-on review, but there's another reason for that, which I'll eventually get into. I was happy to see that UFO is straight and to the point from the start. There was almost immediate gameplay and I appreciated that. To make things even better, the concept of the game is easy to understand. It's kind of like Tetris, but with more gameplay elements involved, those being platforming, shooting, overcoming enemies/obstacles, and trying to think strategically while juggling multiple different things at once. From how I describe UFO, you'd think that any game that features what I just mentioned would leave me enamored with it, but that's not the case. It's not just a game including them, but knowing how to balance them in such a way that it leads to having a good time and wanting to come back for more. I was happy with the immediate gameplay, but what got to me was how bothersome the tutorial was. I get that it's there to familiarize players with the concept of the game and what's necessary in order to move on, but it got way too repetitive. It's because it kept popping up after failing to advance. It would have been nice had that just gone away after a handful of attempts, or even offering the option to turn it off, but you could say that I'm to blame for that due to failing the first level a handful of times. Despite being annoyed by the repetitive tutorial section, I grew to appreciate part of that experience because it let me see how tight UFO's gameplay was. I was happy with the jumping mechanic. It offered a lot of control, and as a result of that, you could end up getting a bit of hang time and feeling floaty, or you can make it so that you jump and drop almost immediately. Both ways would eventually have a lot to offer, depending on the present situation, but it was good to know that UFO would allow you to accomplish a basic task in an open-ended manner. I know that I've referred to UFO as being like Tetris, and by the end of this you'll see the multiple ways why I feel that way. Early on in UFO I realized that there were multiple ways of accomplishing what needed to be done. In Tetris there are all sorts of strategies and overall play styles, depending on your skill and preferences. The same could be said of UFO. You could destroy the blocks one by one, you could group up colors to create small combos, or you could be patient and group up many of the blocks to get a high combo/score. What's great is that every method that you can think of when it comes to destroying blocks works, but there are also pros and cons. If you just destroy the blocks individually, you slowly accrue points. On the bright side, you're able to destroy them faster, and this allows you to move similar blocks into one big piece. I'd eventually realize that I was better off sticking to the latter because that led to me quickly leveling up and unlocking gems that would allow me to advance to new worlds. The problem with this method is that due to being part of a larger collection of blocks, it'd take a while to destroy them. For the first 3 hours or so this was a pain to deal with, but thankfully, that eventually changed. For the first few hours of UFO, I wanted to be able to shoot faster. Not only because I'd be able to get rid of even more blocks, but because I just wanted to be able to play faster. It might have to do with the fact that I'm decently skilled at Tetris, which means that I can play well at fast speeds, so you could say I wanted that to also transfer over to UFO. I'd eventually come to realize that was possible, but that's something I'll bring up later on, and that also required a lot of effort to make possible. I wanted UFO in general to move faster because waiting for blocks to come down got annoying. I would have liked to have been able to have control over their speed, but that wasn't possible. Instead, I'd have to rely on making do with the blocks that were available to me. Doing that would bring about another issue. The problem being that when I take out too many blocks and they're being slow to arrive, I risk leaving myself exposed to the floor's spikes. I'd eventually realize that the blocks would start to drop faster, but that also went hand in hand with having to deal with too many obstacles. It's worth saying that UFO is a fair game. This isn't perfectly handled for all of the game, but it does a good enough job that I'm able to say that I was generally happy with how it challenged me while also offering a helping hand. What I'm getting at is that UFO's power-ups were both helpful and varied. I thought that being able to choose which power-up I wanted to use was cool. It gave me more control over the gameplay due to faster shooting, being able to acquire double the stars from destroyed blocks, a protective shield, and an obstacle destroyer. For the majority of my time with UFO, I mainly stuck to getting double stars and the faster shooting rate. It's because that allowed me to score more points at a faster rate, so I could be able to play in the way that best felt comfortable for me. I eventually realized that each power-up was helpful depending on the situation I happened to be in. I really liked that because it left me thinking that's the result of attention to detail and maintaining balance. Being able to choose which power-ups I wanted to use was nice, but I was even happier when I realized that I could change my equipment. From what I was able to unlock, I saw that each new one did something different that would affect gameplay. Depending on what you prefer, you could have your overall equipment match your playstyle. Initially, I decided to stick to the basics because that was what I was most familiar/efficient with. It's nice to see a variety of equipment, but it took time getting used to it. One of the first things I unlocked was a new weapon, which was a drill. It was fast, but its main drawback was that you could only aim down. That was disappointing to realize, but it's great that there were drawbacks. Another example is how the laser has recoil that moves you back while fired. If the new equipment had no drawbacks, that would most likely lead to throwing the game off balance. The further I got into UFO, the more I realized it was far from being a casual puzzle game. At certain points you could meet new characters out in space and take them aboard your ship. These colorful characters helped spice things up by simply being there, but they also offered challenges/more in-depth tutorials. I thought they'd be a breeze to go through, seeing as how I was around 5 or 6 hours into playing UFO, but they were harder than I thought they'd be. These challenges were fun and didn't feel like a lazy addition. I especially liked how they took basic mechanics and forced you to use them in more complex ways. The point being that you could take what you learned and apply it during the main parts of the game. With how these challenges/tutorials were arranged, I was vaguely reminded of the challenge modes from Tetris DS. The idea being that both games took what was familiar to the player and then changed that. It also helped that these parts of UFO added what could be seen as side quests. What bothered me was that some of the challenges didn't offer a good enough reward for their level of difficulty. It wasn't as if they were impossible to overcome, but they required more effort than I thought they would. So it bummed me out when I'd see that I'd only get one of whichever resource I was looking to get. If I were to sum up the idea behind UFO, it's that it's to take basic concepts and spice them up. I've already made that clear by mentioning Tetris more than once, but now I'd like to discuss the enemies/obstacles. Simply put, the enemies and obstacles made UFO harder than if it were without them. At first it was easy to get used to them, but as the level progressed, so would their drop rate. There was a power-up that made it so that you could destroy them by simply shooting at them, but when that wasn't available, they could only be destroyed by getting rid of a block adjacent to them. It was largely fun dealing with these enemies/obstacles, but it would eventually get to the point where it was a hassle balancing so many things at once. This was made even worse when whichever level you happened to be on was filled with blocks. You'd have multiple objects on screen, and since some were projectiles out to get you, it was easy to overlook something and take damage or be killed. Though that may be true, the devs made things fair by making it so that some obstacles had tells to let you know what to avoid and when. It was mainly with explosive objects/obstacles, but I appreciated seeing a countdown. With these explosive ones, I could pretty much use them against themselves. If I saw an explosive box that I could trigger or shoot without needing a block, I'd do so in order to avoid having to worry about it at a later time. One of my biggest issues with UFO is that I didn't think it'd end up being a bit grindy. This was towards the middle/end of the game. It was because in order to unlock new worlds, you needed a higher number of gems compared to what was previously necessary. It's understandable that this part of UFO would get harder, seeing as how most games get harder the further you get into them, but I felt that this could have been handled better. Due to needing a specific number of gems to unlock new worlds, sometimes I'd have to backtrack to old worlds. This was because I had better equipment/experience, so I could work towards unlocking what I was previously unable to. This led to me getting the gems that I needed, and I know that I'm making this sound like a chore, but it wasn't all that bad. After beating enough challenges in a level, you could unlock power-ups to make the old levels more challenging and fun. You could make the blocks drop at a faster rate, which made me happy. You could start off from level 2, or you could have power-ups without having to gather them yourself. I didn't like having to put forth so much effort in order to unlock new worlds, mainly because it felt like it wasn't necessary to make this part of UFO the way that it was. One of the best compliments I can give UFO is that within a handful of days I hit a little over 11 hours of playtime with it. I realize that for some that's 1 or 2 play sessions, but for me that's rare nowadays because I'm no longer a kid that just games all day. Much like with Signalis, UFO left me wanting to play despite knowing that I had other things to take care of. I knew I had to do them, but it was easy to keep playing UFO because of how into it I was. It also helped that I wanted to try to beat the game so that I could give it a full review, but getting to that point was harder than I thought it'd be. I also enjoyed the experience of being able to play UFO on my Steam Deck. Rather than having to sit at my desk, which can sometimes be a pain, I could play while in bed or in a recliner. I know some players are all about getting the most out of a game when it comes to its graphics and other benefits as a result of gaming on PC, but UFO isn't the kind of game that needs a high quality monitor and GPU to get the best out of it. UFO in general is a great game, but playing it on my Steam Deck made the experience even better because of how easy it was to jump back in and keep playing. It also helped that it's been a while since a game such as this one left me absolutely hooked. To some, unidentified fallen objects will be seen as a Tetris ripoff, but there's plenty in this game to make it its own thing. At the time of this writing, I'd say I'm maybe 5 hours from beating it, and though this may be a first impressions video, another compliment that I can give is that it's left me wanting to return to it and beat what's left. That's generally not the case for me when it comes to games that I preview or cover in this manner. Unidentified Falling Objects is a great puzzle game that has the possibility of drawing you in the way it did with me. Right now, UFO is on sale for $9.89 and its regular price is $14.99. Though I received the key of this game for free, it's worth its price and I recommend it. It's the kind of game that you can beat and keep coming back to because of the open-ended nature of the gameplay it has to offer. How much grind are you willing to put up with in a game? What's the latest game that's absolutely left you hooked? If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much for watching.